Psychologists use this strategy not because it turns people into something extraordinary overnight, but because it quietly dismantles the internal structure that makes weakness feel permanent. And once that structure collapses, what people once called weakness loses its meaning entirely, because weakness was never a trait, never a flaw, never something carved into personality. It was a relationship, a pattern, a way the mind learned to interpret discomfort, fear, and uncertainty as proof of limitation. And the strategy begins with a truth most people resist because it feels destabilizing. Weakness is not something you have. It is something you believe is happening to you, and belief is the most powerful psychological force the brain possesses, because the brain does not respond to reality as it is, but to reality as it is interpreted. Give a person a few minutes, not to motivate them, not to inspire them, not to push them, but to reposition how they observe their own inner experience. And the entire architecture of weakness begins to dissolve, because what feels like weakness is almost always the nervous system reacting to threat, not the self failing at life. And psychologists learned long ago that when a person stops identifying with that reaction, the reaction loses authority. Most people live inside their reactions without realizing it, mistaking anxiety for danger, hesitation for incapacity, fear for truth, and so their lives slowly shrink, not because they are incapable, but because their minds are trying to protect them from imagined outcomes using outdated survival strategies. And this is where the illusion of weakness is born, not in reality, but in interpretation. The strategy psychologists use is deceptively simple and endlessly difficult to describe in words, because it does not change behavior directly. It changes identity location, meaning it moves the sense of self from inside the reaction to outside of it. And once that shift occurs, the reaction is no longer experienced as me, but as something happening. And this single grammatical change rewires how the brain responds emotionally. Consider how many people say, "I am weak," when what they actually mean is, "My nervous system is overwhelmed," or "My thoughts are loud," or "My fear is speaking." And notice how different those experiences feel when the word "I" is removed from the sentence, because psychologists understand that identification is what gives emotions their power, and de-identification is what returns choice. Weakness feels permanent only when it feels personal, and the moment it becomes impersonal, it becomes temporary, observable, workable, and eventually irrelevant. Give someone a few minutes to notice this, not intellectually but experientially, and the inner tension they have been carrying for years begins to loosen because they stop fighting themselves. And fighting the self is the fastest way to exhaust the mind. What most people call weakness is simply friction between who they think they must be and what they are feeling in the moment. And that friction generates shame, and shame locks patterns in place, because shame convinces the brain that something must be hidden, corrected, or suppressed, and suppression strengthens whatever it tries to eliminate. Psychologists do not erase weakness by removing fear, doubt, or hesitation. They erase weakness by removing shame from those experiences, because fear without shame is just information. Doubt without shame is just uncertainty, and hesitation without shame is just the body asking for a moment. The strategy works because it exposes a deeper illusion, the idea that strength means the absence of internal resistance, when in reality strength is the capacity to remain present while resistance exists. And once a person understands this, their entire self-concept changes, because they stop measuring themselves by how confident they feel and start measuring themselves by how available they are to experience life without retreating. Give the mind a few minutes to see that weakness is not something to overcome, but something to observe, and the nervous system exits survival mode, because observation signals safety, and safety unlocks higher cognitive function, and higher cognitive function feels like confidence, clarity, and capability. Even though nothing externally changed, this is why the strategy feels almost unfairly effective. because it does not require effort, discipline, or belief. It requires awareness, and awareness is not something the brain resists, because it does not threaten survival. The moment a person stops trying to fix their weakness and starts watching it with curiosity, the mind recalibrates, because curiosity and fear cannot occupy the same space at the same time, and psychologists know this, which is why they guide people not toward solutions first, but toward perception shifts. Weakness collapses when it is seen clearly, because clarity removes exaggeration, and exaggeration is what makes fear feel enormous and permanent. Think about how many weaknesses dissolve when they are named accurately. Procrastination becomes avoidance of discomfort. Laziness becomes exhaustion. Insecurity becomes fear of rejection. Lack of discipline becomes emotional overload. And suddenly the problem is no longer identity-based. It is situational, contextual, solvable, or at the very least, understandable. Understanding is the beginning of power, not control, but power in the sense of agency. And agency is the opposite of weakness. Psychologists are not erasing something from the person. They are erasing a misunderstanding about the self, and misunderstandings feel permanent only until they are corrected. The strategy permanently changes how someone relates to weakness, because once the mind learns that it is not its reactions, it stops panicking about having them. And panic is what turns temporary states into lifelong identities. This is why people often say, after truly grasping this shift, that their problems are still there, but they feel lighter, less threatening, less defining, because the self is no longer fused with every internal fluctuation. Weakness depends on fusion to survive, and awareness dissolves fusion naturally. Without confrontation, give a person a few minutes to sit with this, not to repeat affirmations, not to force calm, but simply to notice the difference between the observer and the observed, and the brain experiences a subtle but profound relief, because it realizes it no longer has to defend the self against itself. Defense consumes energy, and when defense drops, energy returns, and energy feels like strength, even though it was never lost, only misallocated. The reason this strategy feels permanent is because once someone experiences themselves as the space in which weakness appears, rather than the weakness itself, they cannot unknow that distinction. And every future moment of fear, doubt, or hesitation arrives already framed differently, already less convincing, already less powerful. Weakness relies on immediacy, on the sense that this is happening now and it defines me. But awareness stretches time, creating a pause, and in that pause, meaning changes. Psychologists understand that the mind is plastic not because it can be filled with new beliefs, but because perspective can be shifted, and perspective governs interpretation, and interpretation governs emotion. This is why people who understand this strategy do not become fearless, but they become unafraid of fear, and that distinction is everything. Fear no longer signals incapacity. It signals aliveness, challenge, transition, growth. And when fear is reinterpreted, weakness loses its narrative. The brain stops telling a story of limitation and starts telling a story of movement. And movement is the enemy of stagnation. The strategy does not promise that life will be easier, but it guarantees that difficulty will no longer be mistaken for deficiency, and that single correction erases most of what people call weakness. In the end, psychologists are not giving people strength. They are revealing that strength was never absent, only obscured by misinterpretation. And once the mind stops calling every uncomfortable signal a flaw, it stops collapsing under its own judgment. And a mind that is no longer judging itself harshly becomes naturally more resilient, more adaptive, more capable, not because it tried to be strong, but because it stopped believing it was weak. And that belief, quietly, decisively, permanently, is what changes everything.